It's a video special from the Mossad Files. I'm Dan Raviv, co-author with Yossi Melman of 5 books about Israeli strategy, diplomacy, and intelligence. And on the audio version of the Mossad Files podcast, every week I bring you some of the latest, some perspective on what's been going on. There's always a lot. And as much as I can, some fascinating interview guests. And that's why we have this video special, because Yaakov Katz is joining me. There you are right now. Welcome to the Mossad Files, Yaakov.
Dan, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, very well known, among people who read about Israel, news about Israel, because Yaakov, you were editor-in-chief, you were, of the Jerusalem Post. You keep writing columns that we see elsewhere, Newsweek, lots of other publications. You're on TV, and now a book. Congratulations on that. A new book called While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East, which is the question just about everyone's been asking. I get it asked all the time. If the Mossad is so good, if the Israeli army is, incredibly good for a country of just 10 million people, how could everything have gone so wrong on October 7th? So, hey, we have almost half an hour, so I'm going to give you the floor for at least a few minutes. Answer the question, in effect, of your book title, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. How?
Well, I sigh because it's a big one. I think we have to go to the foundation, or to the core, Dan, of why Israel fell into a state of complacency, believed in what I've come to call the fairy tale of what it is, of that basically Israel could live alongside a genocidal terrorist group that calls for its destruction, that says we're coming to destroy you, we're coming to kidnap you, we're coming to rape you, that practices out in the open in Gaza, as Hamas did, with building mock bases and raiding them and grabbing people over the shoulder and taking them off as if they were abducting soldiers, had built up tunnel networks all throughout Gaza. And Israel said to itself, you don't mean that. You don't want that. What you want is money. You want workers to come in from Gaza into Israel to bring economic prosperity. You don't really mean what you're saying. And when you look at the entirety of the story, which is what Amir, my co-author, and I tried to do,
Amir Bohbot, we should say,
yes, is put together not only what happened between October 5, 6, and 7 that culminated in the horrific massacre and invasion on the morning of October 7th, but what about the 30 years before? What happened that we fell into this belief that Hamas could be deterred, that Hamas could be contained, and that Hamas did not have to ever be taken on in a full confrontation?
Is that a kind of wishful thinking when you talk about the fairy tale? It's not just an intelligence mistake. It's people who are hopeful that Hamas can be tamed. And I know we'll get to talking about who are these people who apparently were so terribly wrong.
But I think that's exactly the point, because you know Israel very well. And Israeli people, I think on a certain level, they look at themselves as being part of the Western world, part of Western society. They look to the West for cultural ties and trade ties. Israelis watch American movies, not Indian movies, and not Chinese television. We're part of the Western world, and the West wants quiet and peaceful relations and wants to live to enjoy life. Israelis sanctify life. But really, when you think about it, Israel is in the worst neighborhood. What was Israel thinking? That this terrorist army could be left alone to grow in capabilities, in weapons, and in people, and it wouldn't have to be dealt with. That we could think that every 2 years or so we would fight an operation, there would be some mini war with Gaza. Remember, Israel pulled out 20 years ago almost exactly from Gaza in 2005. 2006 was Operation Summer Rains. 2008-9 was Cast Lead. 2012 was Pillar of Defense. 2014 was Protective Edge. It was a game of whack-a-mole, but it never reached the point of we have to finish this once and for all. And I think the reason that happened was because Israel believed that containment could work here with Gaza and with Hamas for 3 primary reasons. The first reason being that Hamas was not viewed as a strategic threat. I've met with many of the ministers who were in the war cabinet over the last almost 2 years now. And you asked them, what was your greatest surprise over from how this all happened? And it was how formidable Hamas became, how strong it was, and how much of a threat it really was to Israel. The second thing that was part of this containment is, look, at the end of the day, we have bigger fish to fry. We have Iran, we have Hezbollah, we have bigger issues. Hamas is, like we said, the weakest of Israel's enemies. And then number three was that Israel, Amir and I wrote a book before this one called Weapon Wizards, where we told the story of Israel's amazing military technology. Iron Dome as an example. Wow, what a system. Can intercept incoming rockets, saves lives, protects infrastructure. But it also turned the rockets into a mosquito that you could just swat away. When in 2014 in the summer, when Hamas was crossing into Israel in these cross-border attack tunnels and popping out of them and killing soldiers, Israel said, okay, we got to deal with these cross-border tunnels. They built an underground wall. They called it the Iron Wall. They spent billions of dollars on that barrier and on creating these teams of brilliant Israeli scientists and engineers and soldiers from like the Talpiot unit, the famous, really the smartest of the smart, sonar experts, geologists, seismic experts, you name it, to find out when they're digging a tunnel, where the tunnel is. They were so good at it. We detail this in the book. They could tell if it was a jackhammer, a shovel, a bulldozer, what was even digging underground. Now,
And
you know, Dan.
the mentality behind a lot of that work. I know I also met a lot of the engineers who worked on Iron Dome, and they felt they possibly, this is shades of Woodrow Wilson, World War One, they possibly were preventing all future wars because then Israel would never have to cross into Gaza and kill a lot of people and make a mess. So, right, they thought it was again, well, I guess what you're calling the fairy tale,
Well,
all these defensive
they believe,
systems.
yeah, and it worked, and it created this illusion and this reality that we had security, and that every rocket didn't have to be met with response. We could contain it. When we built that underground wall and the technology to detect the tunnels, we said, okay, we're now safe. They're there. We're here. They can't come here. How many Hamas guys crossed into Israel on October 7th through tunnels? Zero. So it all shattered right before our eyes. And that containment policy, I think, is what contributed to this belief that Hamas could be deterred, Hamas could be detained, and Hamas does not have to be confronted.
Now, so far you've avoided naming names. In many people's systems of government and politics, it's the top person, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, should be responsible. And then you add the detail, including that he allowed, I think it even encouraged the Arab country of Qatar to deliver cash. Do you agree? Probably over $1 billion of cash to the Gaza Strip, where Hamas had money for all of its needs. And Netanyahu must have thought that Hamas, well, it's the fairy tale you said, Hamas is interested in money. Yeah.
You know, I think that Netanyahu definitely bears a lot of the responsibility. It's no question. And we avoid getting into the politics of it within the book because it would just make everything murky. But he is the top. He was the architect largely of the policy. He was the one who brought the Qataris to transfer those $30 million in cash, and in the beginning through suitcases of cash to Gaza that was used to distribute to people and needy Palestinians. But we can obviously understand that if Hamas now has an extra $30 million that goes to the people, it can take a different 30 million and put it towards its terrorist and military infrastructure.
But you're not trying to nail the prime minister.
No, because I'll tell you why. Because
Okay,
it was
yeah.
everyone. And it was Netanyahu when he was prime minister. For the 18 months that Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid were prime ministers, they believed in this as well. Let me remind you, Dan, that when Yair Lapid was prime minister, just for a few months in the summer of 2022, when that government had collapsed, there was a very short operation, just about 48 hours, that Israel fought against Islamic Jihad called Breaking Dawn. And Israel believed we can keep it just focused on Islamic Jihad, not on Hamas. We'll isolate Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to get involved. And Israel's interpreted this as Hamas is deterred. We're able to now even fight against just this one faction, and we don't have to get involved with Hamas. But that was wrong. That was us believing that we can divide and not have to deal with the real issue. So everybody believed and bought into it, and it trickled down.
By the way, Hamas exercising some restraint then and perhaps on some other occasions, apparently part of the Hamas planning not to give away that it was plenty militant and focusing on doing something big that turned out to be October 7th. I mean, is that your reading? Hamas, by the way, Hamas, very clever, fooling the Israelis, not sending electronic messages that could be intercepted. I mean, in ways that were both simple and complex, shall we say? Or you're not giving Hamas that much credit for
No, I think
fooling
Hamas
Israel?
Hamas was brilliant in what it did. The way it played Israel, the way it put Israel to sleep, the way it led Israel to believe that it was not interested in war when in fact it was planning the greatest assault on Israel and was coordinating with the Iranians, was coordinating with Hezbollah. Hamas was so excited that Yahya Sinwar decided to pull the trigger before Hezbollah could get involved because he wanted to take the glory and credit for himself.
Mm.
But Israel, and I'll say another thing. I mean, it's sophisticated. Its attack on October 7th, the way it came in, the way it crossed the border, the way it took out communications, it took out the eyes and ears that Israel had along the border, using drones, dropping explosive devices, raiding those borderline outposts immediately, neutralizing them. You know, lots of people want to say there must have been some mole or some spy that Hamas had within the top command because it doesn't make sense. Why did it take the military so long to respond? Well, the tragic simple answer is no one knew what was going on because they had so efficiently knocked out communications. So the people in the Gaza division couldn't talk to the people back in Tel Aviv headquarters and explain what was happening. I spoke with pilots who were boarded their F-16s and flew out to the Mediterranean to protect gas rigs, as opposed to just dealing with the people who were crossing the border at that moment because they just didn't know.
I mean, I remember on the morning of October 7th seeing, I guess just on Twitter, on X, that people, I guess in Sderot, were posting video of terrorists on one of those white pickup trucks, and they were armed in the back and shooting bullets all over. And I thought to myself, an Israeli Air Force helicopter gunship is going to appear in the sky any moment and blast that. So, did you get into even the tactical failures there? I mean, if I, watching Twitter in the United States, could see that there were terrorists driving around Sderot, I mean, I realized there are little places and confusing reports from various kibbutzim and a music festival that the higher ups didn't even know was taking place. But no helicopter gunships. It took hours. What's that about?
This was the complete breakdown that we saw in the chain of command and in the ability to make decisions in that moment. The fog of war was so dense and so thick that they weren't able, it took them such a long time to come back and to stand on their 2 feet and to understand what they had to do. And you saw, by the way, throughout the day, Israel did push back Hamas. It took a day or two, and they were able to push Hamas out of Israel back into the Gaza Strip or capture or kill those who were still remaining inside Israel. Every battle that the IDF fought, it has won in these almost 2 years since that horrific day and the war erupted. But what we looked at more was the run up to that 6:29 a.m. moment when the rockets started to be launched at Israel. What happened during that night? What was, because the intelligence was there. We now know, and there was a flurry of activity, right? Officers were talking to other officers. They were saying, well, what do you make of this? And what do you make of that? And we see them preparing an underground bunker, and we see them uncovering rocket launchers, and we see the SIM cards from the Palestinian ones being replaced with Israeli ones, which might mean that they're preparing to cross into Israel. It was all on the table, but it wasn't pieced together. And you know this about intelligence, the difficulty in piecing the puzzle together, but also in understanding what is the intention. And the dilemma was real. Is this a drill? Is this an attack? And if it is an attack, what kind of attack is it?
Take us to the top level. What have you learned about what Prime Minister Netanyahu was told in the first hours? Because I know recently there's been more controversy as to whether he was awakened by his top aides. Did he ask the right questions? So I know you're going to be fair. So tell me, what's your understanding? What did he do? What was he told at the beginning?
Prime Minister Netanyahu was not woken up during the night. And that's true. And he clings to that, by the way, and uses that as the reason to say, had I been woken up, I could have potentially prevented this. It's the we'll never know category of things in life. But I also want to say is that it's hard to imagine that he would have made a different decision than that was made because, and you know how this works, and you've detailed many of these stories and instances in your writing. You know, the prime minister gets that call and is told, listen, we have some intelligence. We see A, B, C. He'll ask, okay, IDF chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, Shin Bet chief Ronain Bar, military intelligence chief Aaron Kleva, what's your assessment? And they would say, well, we think it might be a drill. We don't think it's an attack. Maybe he would have said, well, prepare something. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he would say, let's reconvene. It would have, I imagine he wouldn't have said, let's launch a preemptive attack. And let's also keep in mind that Netanyahu has always been very hesitant to use force against Hamas. While he returned to office in 2009 with the promise that he will topple Hamas, in the 14 years since then until October 7th, he did much of the opposite. He, to some extent, even bolstered Hamas with the
Do you
Qatari
believe
money.
he was trying to weaken the other faction, the Fatah faction, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank? Yes.
I think that he saw in Hamas an opportunity to achieve one of his life missions, which was also the to torpedo and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. How can we ever allow for the establishment of a Palestinian state if the Palestinians themselves are so divided? If a terrorist organization rules the Gaza Strip?
And just in case we don't get to a fuller discussion of that, let's take a small detour here because now, whether it's Netanyahu or other members of his government or many typical Israelis, right, they might have a different reason to say, how can there be a Palestinian state when they, and the rest of the sentence often is, it sure looks like a majority of Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank agreed with the attack and agreed with the hostage taking. And it's been pointed out that no one in Gaza did anything to try to help a single Israeli hostage. But right, that appears to be a strong feeling in Israel now. There's no mood for a two-state solution now,
No,
largely because of October 7th.
I think October 7th has set back the opportunity for a two-state solution for many years, at least for a generation. And I think legitimately to an extent. And I've long been a proponent of a two-state solution. But I think that for that to happen and for that to be real, we need to see a change of the culture, a de-radicalization. And it's not just Hamas, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which continues to pay salaries to terrorists, which is ineffective in of itself, its education system, which continues to teach the delegitimization of Israel, and got, of course, Hamas, which teaches to murder you and I. This has to change, and that will take time. That's the real way to get back on the track for a two-state solution, is to change the reality, to change the culture, to have a generation that actually doesn't believe in destruction, but believes in coexistence. And that's not something that can be achieved overnight.
And what did you think of the plan that seems to be coming from the White House? And it wasn't announced as official, some of the details in the Washington Post, although as though President Trump has returned to the idea of Gaza being a future Riviera on the Mediterranean, and it could have hotels and industries and be very prosperous. And at least during the reconstruction for years, perhaps most of the 2 million Gaza residents would have to be pushed aside into some safe place with plenty of food, water, and medicine. Whew, talk about kind of a fairy tale. Or could some parts of that happen? What do you think?
Hard to see how that happens, Dan. How do you move so many people out of this area? There's 2 million people who live there. And how do you get them to go to want to move to a different place? Who's willing to take them? One of the tragedies of this war is really, and my heart goes out to the Palestinians of Gaza because no one cares about them. Sadly, the reality is such that Israel cares more about them than definitely Hamas cares about them, but even Arab countries care about them. They're not willing to take them in. Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. The Saudis don't want them. Nobody wants them. Israel's going as far as to places in Africa to see if anybody would be willing to take some of the Palestinians and relocate them so that Gaza can be finished in the way of Hamas can be finished and then can be reconstructed, rebuilt, and rehabilitated.
Sure.
But
Palestinian culture includes a strong attachment to the land, plus, mistrusting, distrusting Israel and all those other powers. The word from any Palestinian leadership would be, don't leave. They'll never let you come back. Okay, so these are more reasons why you don't think it's going to work that way. And unfortunately, would you agree, it's more likely that a year or two or three from now, there will be Palestinians in the Gaza Strip living in the ruins and the rubble where there might be some construction projects. And maybe it would be good news if they were financed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But you can't be too optimistic, can we?
I think that we need here in this war, and this is why decisive victory is necessary. And Hamas does have to be defeated and removed from power. What that
You
defeat?
can't declare right now that they're defeated. They're not in power. They have no
No,
government
you can,
building.
you potentially could do that already now with how much they've been degraded and weakened, but that requires getting the hostages back. Any victory without the hostages will not be a victory for the Israeli people. So that's the complexity of this war. But you are right that Hamas is weakened to that point that you could declare the military victory, establish or help establish that new entity that will rebuild and govern Gaza and prevent Hamas from reconstituting and rebuilding. But you'd have to do that hand in hand with the hostage deal, which remains elusive, at least according to the prime minister.
Well, this would be Hamas being totally stubborn, feeling that the hostages, as many as they hold, to the last man, is their only defense. By the way, let's a couple of pages from history. Let's think about 1982. Israel invaded Lebanon to push out the PLO, and within months, thanks to mediation by the U.S. and others, Yasser Arafat agreed to leave, and the ships took the PLO fighters to far off Tunisia in North Africa. And I know about a year ago, I dreamt that Hamas might be reasonable enough to free the hostages and take that ticket out. But they're not, right? They're not
They're
that
not.
tough.
All indications are Hamas is not going to give up. It's not going to surrender, and it's not going to willingly expel itself or go out off into exile like Yasser Arafat did back in the day.
Well, let me guess, Yaakov, that a definition of victory, since you said Hamas needs to be defeated and you said all the hostages need to be released, and let's hope those who are alive now will still be alive. The only part that you really can measure is that a deal is made, or in some way Hamas is compelled to release them all. That's the only thing I can measure, because I cannot tell you that every last Hamas card carrying member has been killed. I can't measure that. I can't
And
go
they
to
and they
that.
haven't, by the way. And we know that there are Hamas fighters and there's Hamas weapons, and we're still finding Hamas tunnels. And Israeli soldiers are sadly, tragically still getting killed by Hamas. The fighting is still in some parts intense. And if the Gaza offensive, the Gaza City offensive does go ahead, that will be a tough battle for Israel because of the capabilities that still remain there. But even
So,
with
so what's your goal? You can't kill everyone. You're trying to compel them to surrender, put their hands up, release the hostages, and maybe leave for
you're trying
Tunisia.
to use the military pressure in the buildup towards this operation to get Hamas to recognize that it is in its interest not for this operation to go ahead, to release the hostages, and to call the war to an end. It will have some of its own victories that it will be able to claim, getting Israel out of Gaza, withdrawing from some of those corridors that it has taken up, pulling back its forces. And it will have to see the establishment of a new entity and a new government. And Hamas will try to reconstitute itself. There's no question. There's no
But
doubt.
Israel will be smarter. Israelis will have read your book and maybe some others, right? When you write while Israel slept, there will be an intention by every responsible Israeli leader not to sleep next time, and maybe in effect to have kind of a security strip around the Gaza Strip.
That is one of the issues that is being talked about. But what's probably more important is the need for a new security doctrine, of one that holds by preemption and does not wait for threats to explode and into Israel and along its borders. A doctrine that when you see Hamas rebuilding and moving rockets and digging tunnels, we don't just add it to a list of potential targets in a next future operation. We act now. We act swiftly. We see that that's the policy right now, for example, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, despite the ceasefire and despite the efforts that are in place by the new government in Lebanon to rein in Hezbollah. Israel continues to attack when there is a target and when it sees something happening. That is part of this idea that you cannot fall back into the old state of mind of where we just sit back and count the targets and collect them for when the future war will come. This is a change. It's an important change. It does have some sadness to it, though, Dan, because what it means is that Israel will have to fight for many years to come. It will have to keep a level of vigilance that we have not seen in the past.
And perhaps we'll enjoy a future conversation in which we'll talk about what that does to Israel's image worldwide. And our viewers and listeners may think it's not Israel's fault, they're just running a war, or may think that Israel's been too brutal. But indeed, in your book, While Israel Slept, you're showing the change. I would say you're advocating a change that Israel needs to be not just more alert, but don't take so many chances. The risks, the threats are real. And so far, it looks like Israel's not going to take chances. Final minute. I got that about right. And I do think you were advocating for that in the book.
100%. I think that we also have to keep in mind that October 7th is a coin with two sides. The failures, the sleep that Israel was in, which is what this book is about. But the other side is the change to the doctrine and the newer security reality. Israel today is safer, dramatically safer than it was on October 6th of 2023.
Yep, as we know, after the October 7th attack and even during the Gaza war, Israel took decisive action against Iran's proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and it is so weakened. It was paralyzed even when Israel and Iran had their 12-day war in June. And somewhat related, the dictatorship, the Assad regime in Syria fell. So add all that up. Iran is weakened. Israel has shown its strength, innovation, and cleverness while still not having solved the Gaza war and gotten back all the hostages. It's a tragedy, too. I hope we will speak again, Yaakov. There's so much more to cover.
Thank you very much, Dan.
And you are the author, Yaakov Katz, with Amir Bohbot. Their new book is While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. Yaakov Katz, good luck to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
And my thanks to you for watching this video special from the Mossad Files. Please tell your friends that on all the audio podcast platforms, they and you can find the Mossad Files with Dan Raviv. There's a new episode every week. I would appreciate it if you subscribe and download. Of course, it's free. Not free. The most recent book that I wrote with Yossi Melman, it's about Israeli intelligence, a history of the Mossad and other agencies. It's called Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. Thanks again for watching. I'm Dan Raviv.